The pain and the suffering that people have that suffer from mental issues is immense. And when you go through this stuff, you need a guideline. You need a pattern and a safety net in order to be able to withstand the atrocities that you're doing to yourself and to your mind. And this is preposterous for side opposition to try and say that going into deep is the easy path to victory for you to be able to sustain mental health. Very proud to be on government. I have done both, so I have a lot of spec, and you're gonna hear this in my speech. 3 things. 1, how this manifests, who is doing this stuff, how people interact with this narrative. Secondly, what is comparatively better when it comes to people accessing more, but also being able to apply things more. But then thirdly, on pure weighing. On the best case scenario, you do some more insightful thing on the opposition side, while it is uncertain if you can actually access the benefit of it, versus on the best case scenario outside the house, where you do practical things day in and day out on small occasions, and why this is better for either victims of assault, like not specifically people that actually are going into therapy, but other people that might be assaulted by people going into therapy, but also for the people that actually go to therapy, right? So like me managing my mom better and stuff like that. Okay, sure.
How does the therapist know that your problems?
Can you speak louder and clean?
How does your therapist know that the problems you're experiencing are actually the problems you're experiencing?
Bro, you're gonna get it. Okay, 1, who is showcasing this? Okay, it's probably pop culture, it's probably mouth to mouth, it's probably people that are engaging with how TV series portray this type of stuff, maybe governmental administration advertisements, what do you do this? In outside the house, the norm is more likely you go and you have casual conversation about your daily life. In outside the house, you have images like you being turned around in a red chair and asked, how did you feel when you were 6 years old and you pissed yourself in the pants and like people were laughing at you, right? So now outside the house, how do you manage with stress in university? Inside the house, how do you manage your dad hitting your mom and stuff like that? Okay, secondly, I think there are a lot of stereotypes that are exaggerated by this motion, right? Because people are so afraid of the unknown. They're so afraid of getting fucked up in their minds. They're afraid of losing control, right? Because this is very hard for you to, be ashamed about the things that you think and about the experience that you had. It's very hard for you to come out even to your best friends or to your relatives, to your father, to your mother, to your girlfriend or whoever, to actually talk about your deeper inner thoughts and stuff like that. Therefore, the more they see this, the more get intimidated by this. The more they get that you cannot do this and this is very harmful for me and that is very dangerous for me. And therefore the exaggeration and the illustration that you have of this is very intimidating to a degree that you don't want to opt into this stuff and stuff like that. But then lastly, I think there is a lot of stigma in therapy, right? In most societies, people are afraid to admit that they need mental help because they're afraid of admitting themselves that something is fucked up in their minds. This means that there is a high barrier of entry for you to actually admit to yourself that you want to go to therapy. Like me and Panagis, we were also doing therapy, but we were hiding to each other until we actually said to each other, but like we're woke and debate dudes, right? Imagine being actually conservative and living in Bulgaria or like in any country. Okay, so I think like the high barrier of entry will make later importance, explaining why access on outside the house is significantly more important and actually necessary for this motion. Okay, now let's go to the pure comparative, and this is really comparative, and please engage on the best form and not strawman and stuff like that. Okay. 1, why on the side of the house you have a negative case about the structural barriers that people cannot actually opt in and actually go into deep. 1, as I said in my intro about the shaming and all of this stuff, but the issue is people don't conceptualize stuff, right? Because like you don't know what hits you. So like my personal experience is I was waiting for my mom to come from home from my school for my grades, and this patience I projected this to my relationships, waiting for my girlfriend to text me, right? And like to make this link, this is very big brain. It takes a lot of time, right? All of this time that you're fucking suffering, you're in pain and you don't know. And it's very arbitrary if you ever made the connection, if you ever have the capacity to connect the dots and you actually do debate and you can do linear flow and stuff like that. If you were willing to admit to yourself to go into deep, to actually find this stuff, to actually vilify your parents, to actually vilify your teachers, to do all of this stuff. This means that there is also a higher entry for people to do this type of stuff in therapy, to be able to actually make this stuff important to them and stuff like that. This is gonna be very emotional for me. On the positive case, I think there are specific things that you can do in your daily life. Because managing like teachers and managing stress in a university and debate comms and stuff like that, it's easier for you to apply, right? It's easier for you to actually take the advice, to actually be able to apply it and get the small dopamine, right? Because it's easier for you to actually talk about it in the first place and conceptualize this to the therapist themselves, right? So you go there and describe the details which are happening in your day. You're not feeling, the awkwardness of, you don't know what to talk about your daily lives and your childhood, but you have actually something concrete in front of you and you can do this positively, right? Then thirdly, I think the moment you apply this stuff, because it's easier to apply faster, you get the dopamine hit and you get like you get the appreciation of the thing that you get better off, right? You get better off because you think that you can manage, you think that you can cope. This keeps you engaged. In this side of the house, if you have one bad session or two bad sessions that you're tripping a lot, you cannot control your mind. You're way into deep and you don't go out in the moment that you have to go out. You're gonna disengage from therapy. You're gonna stop going to therapy. And in the rest of the house, because it's easier to apply, it's more likely for you to get, engaged in this type of stuff. Closing your extension, please.
You haven't answered my question.
Bro, I think my analysis is prior to your extension because I showcase how therapists work. And okay, if we want to talk this, therapists are skillful in both sides of the house. If in the majority of cases they're less skillful, this is better for us because conventional therapy is easier to apply. If, like in the rest of the house, if you're a bad therapist, you can give maybe a shitty advice, but the patterns repeat. You talk about why you shouldn't throw value through the university, why you should manage your mom better and pause when she's doing stuff and stuff like that. In your side of the house, if therapists are bad, this is significantly worse because then you're very into deep thoughts that you cannot control, and this person does not give you the capacity to go out, does not give you the capacity to be able to control this stuff. Impacts. One, in the rest of the house, people show up significantly less, or even if they disengage while doing the therapy, which is worse because they leave middle stuff. And if you actually go into interactive stuff, but then you don't do closure, this can actually pop up in your mind and have stuff like PTSD and stuff like that. Secondly, people go more into meds in the rest of the house. Like for you to be in deeper thoughts, you have to do ayahuasca and stuff like that in order to open up your mind and to throw down the barriers. Thirdly, there is the reversibility of the harm. In the worst case scenario on opposition side, you trip and you apply this trauma to every occasion that you are. In the house, if you get a bad advice about the girlfriend, then it's fine and it's micro scale harm, it's better. So even on the worst case scenario, we're still winning. But then I think the preemptive microaggression, Claudia will explain more. In the house, you pick up the red flags easier, right? Because it's conventional, it's daily. So you see that they're very threatful and stuff like that. In the rest of the house, it is very uncertain if you're ever going to connect the dots, but it's also very uncertain to know to what extent they might harm the person. To what extent they might actually do the thing that you're afraid of. Therefore, in the house, we have also better prevention of this type of microaggressions because I think people need this type of therapy and they need to go to therapy. Vote OG, vote us.
We thank the speaker for the excellent speech, and we now call leader of opposition to open for opposition side. Here.
That's outrageous.
D-U.
Thank you, Harvey. To be fair, I'm from Glasgow, so. Okay. We agree with opening government. Therapy is incredibly important to allow people to process traumas that they've been through, to allow people to understand how their brain works, and be able to find actual mechanisms to be able to cope better with life. The problem is when you're in an environment where those mechanisms are forced upon you, you probably don't actually come to good conclusions about the types of behaviour patterns that you have. You probably don't find solutions that actually work for the issues that you face. And I think people become far more disillusioned with therapy when they never feel that they're making progress or finding out any of the underlying things that they couldn't already have thought about themselves. First of all, what does this introspective therapy look like? The first thing here is I just think there's some level of therapist input that still happens under our side of the house. So it still looks like having therapists guided discussions, asking people prompting questions that get people to lead to open up more about specific things. So asking people why do you feel a specific way? Or how do you remember growing up? How did your parents treat you? These types of questions. I think these questions are often less based on trying to find a solution. So you're not trying to distill down to what the specific problem is, as opposed to just trying to find out in general how this person feels about various situations. So questions are not necessarily as leading to specific conclusions, but rather just generally about trying to provide the best sort of most therapeutic discussion for these people. Secondly, I think often the conversations don't have to be as deep of a dive as opening government say that they have to be. I would note that often it's a very gradual process by which we build up these types of discussions. So not every single time that you go to a therapist do you have to talk about some deep-rooted trauma in you that means you have a very emotional response afterwards. Often you open up very slowly over time. And I'd also just posit that the more comfortable environment that we have under our side of the house makes it far easier to have these discussions in the first place. Because ultimately you probably want to talk about our childhood trauma at some point in therapy. It's very difficult to have those conversations when you're face-to-face with a therapist, when you feel as if they're going to judge you for the specific specific things you're saying, or when you feel as if they're going to try to medicalize whatever it is you're telling them. Comparatively, facing away from that person, being able to like go into your own head, into your own world, and feeling as if you're removed from that room, feeling as if you're not like in a specific conversation, probably means that you're much more comfortable and therefore open up far better under our side of the house, making the experience far nicer for individuals that do go to therapy. First of all then, I just want to explain why therapists are probably very bad at conversational therapy in the first place. The first thing here is I think the way that therapists like perceive of their position under government side of the house is to try to figure out the problem with an individual and then provide some solution for that problem that's going to fix that person. And I would note that most of the ways that therapists are taught are very textbook. They're taught to look at specific signs in specific ways and like identify these problems in specific manners and then give specific frameworks to fix these things. But I think frameworks are just generally very bad at being very specific to specific people's problems. I think generally therapists don't know how like to fix every single person. And I think what happens under government side of the house therefore is that you're likely to have very generalized ideas or solutions that are presented upon you as opposed to coming to ones that might actually be far more specific to the issues that you have. Secondly though, I think the people that are likely to be therapists often are just like more mentally stable people. And the reason for this is that you yourself have to deal with a lot of trauma that people then put onto you, and so it's very difficult to be like a therapist if you yourself struggle from lots of different like mental health issues yourself. So I think that probably means that the people that are likely to be therapists are people that have less of an experience having the mental health struggles the people that sit in therapy are likely to have. What this means therefore is that they're less likely to, for example, like have the same level of empathy for the situation that someone is going through, right? So I think what this means therefore is that they have a bias, no thank you, towards like thinking that behaviour might be irrational in some sort of format. I think comparatively what happens under our side of the house is that therapists, while they are the same types of people, are probably far more empathetic in their approach to these situations because they're not trying to like medicalize you to the same extent or find a solution for you. They're just trying to listen to your problems, and that's a far easier thing to do than figuring out the thing that might be wrong with you. The implication of all this therefore is I think you probably get given bad strategies under Gov's side of the house, and this is really bad not only because this no thank you is just a massive waste of people's time in therapy, it makes them feel as if they're not progressing, but I think more so also just make people feel massively guilty when the solutions don't work for their problems, right? I think what happens when you go to therapy and you get given like a textbook thing to do every single time you feel anxiety, right, is that you do that thing and it doesn't work for you and then you feel like a failure. I think it's very difficult to conceive of the fact that your therapist might be wrong about a specific thing because they're in a position of authority and they're the one that's trained in these specific places, no thank you. So it's very difficult to feel as if maybe what your therapist is saying to you is incorrect. So you just feel massively guilty that what you're being told isn't working for you. You feel as if you're broken, you feel as if you're massively fucked up and nothing's ever going to get like better for you. I think this is just massively harmful for individuals therefore that have to sit in these situations where they're given like prescriptive solutions that are very good for people. Closing.
Okay, maybe I feel sad because I can't run my depression away. Why do I feel less depressed just because my therapist listens to me on your
Yeah, so that's exactly what I'm going to get onto now. So why is our side then comparatively better? Excellent. A couple of reasons for this. The first thing here is just being able to identify problems far better under our side of the house. And this is really important, right? Because most of the time we exhibit behaviour, but that behaviour doesn't necessarily have a singular cause. That behaviour might have been sparked by something that happened in our life at some point, but probably has like a deeper underlying psychological reason for that thing happening. It's often triggered by lots of different things, and it's often very difficult for individuals to figure out those things in the first place. So I think under our side of the house, you just explore the underlying reasons for behaviour, and I think often this is a very long process. It can take a lot of time to figure out these things because you have to unpack lots of like points within your life, often points that might have seemed quite inconsequential to you at the time, but have mentally altered you. And I think under our side of the house, you're far better therefore at being able to identify these problems because you let people speak about their experiences, and therapists are therefore more able to pick up on small instances where like that might have triggered a specific thing or they might have caused a specific problem, which I think just means that you're more able to identify the problem under our side of the house. I think the second thing here then is you're probably better able to fix that problem as a result of it for a few reasons. The first is just no thank you. I think you're able to come to conclusions more about the problems that you have yourself, and I posit this is actually quite a good thing, right? Most people have the capacity to understand that the anxiety they feel as a response to a specific situation or the depression that they might have, it might be irrational, right? I think that's often why people opt into therapy in the first place, is because they understand their behaviour isn't necessarily normal and that there's something like irrational about the way that they think here. The problem is in trying to figure out how to be able to manage that and figure out how to get yourself out of those cycles, right? So I don't think it's very helpful for therapists just to tell you, you should like try to wake up a bit earlier in the morning and go and do some exercise, because for most people they understand that's how they should live their life. They just can't seem to do that, and that's why they're in therapy to begin with. So I think you're better able to come to more conclusions about yourself the more that you unpack things about about yourself. I also think this is where you're able to set more realistic expectations and more realistic solutions for yourself, because you yourself just understand like your mental psyche the most, and therefore I think you're probably more likely to be able to suggest, for example, something that might help you to a therapist, and a therapist is able to verify that that's a good idea or validate you in that feeling, which I think probably happens more under our side of the house. So the upshot of this, therefore, is that the solutions that you get to the problems that people face are likely to be far more specific to the issues that they have, and also are far less likely to feel guilt for those things, because you're likely to come up with those conclusions yourself. Therapy might take slightly longer under our side of the house, but the solutions that happen as a result of them are far more long-lasting and genuinely drill down to the actual problems that people have, rather than just putting a plaster on people and telling them to live like everyone else, when ultimately that does nothing for people in therapy. For these reasons, we oppose.
We thank the speaker for this great speech, and we now call Deputy Prime Minister to continue for government side. Hear, hear.
Okay.
Ready? Very simple path to victory from opening government. I think everybody talks, and this is the most important method of communication which you will have. The successful therapy assumes that you are coming back to the society, you are coming back to your family, you are coming back to your loved ones, you are coming back to your friends, you are coming back to work, and they will not be sitting and listening to you. They will be engaging in the conversations. They will be pointing out the mistakes. They will be interrupting you, which means that on our side of the house, uniquely, for people who have struggled with this, who have problems, who went through trauma before, this is the only unique trial period when you have a person who is trained, who have your goodness, like you're bringing back as their most important interest. There's people who are experienced in reacting to the particular ways in which you are engaging with them. Comparatively, on their side of the house, if your therapists do not talk to you, you are likely to have inner talks and inner monologues with yourself, because you still try to rationalize that, right? You are like, oh, I read in a self-book, in a self-help, in a self-therapy, that maybe this is something which is happening to me. Why do I need to pay to someone else to tell me exactly what I can deduct from certain books and how I can convince myself that I don't need help, that I am the person who is capable to do this? But maybe you are like, oh, I will just talk to my friends. It's like blind leading the blind, or I will talk to the other member of my family, which means that on either side of the house, you will feel as a human being the necessity to share your feelings. You will feel that that you need to communicate with other people. On their side of the house, you will be doing that with people who are unprepared to that, for the people who are not necessarily skilled, who are unclear what will be the consequences of their action. On our side of the house, this is happening in the controlled environment, in a safety net, with the people who are studying you meticulously, your reactions to the particular triggers. If the question and the metric in this debate is on which side of the house you can pick up more signs and more signal, I think you are picking that in the random reactions to the words, or in the laughs, or in the chuckles, or in the body language, when you are observing how people sometimes like gasping, or when people are looking in their eyes towards the sky and they are thinking about something, right? That's the small signs which you are more able to identify if you are treating these people as humans, if you are giving them attention, and if you are actually capable to stop them before spiraling into the other issue. On their side of the house, if you will discover some underlying issues, for example, something happened to you when you were 8 years old which created all of your trauma, are you capable to trust your patient that they will be able to stop and actually rationalize, and that they will not completely stop the progress in the therapy because they will over-focus on this one thing? You can't control the kind of monologue, what they can discover, and then it's very hard to gain their trust back, right? Because you just put them into the most traumatic experience right now. You are not giving them, dosing them. You are not prepared that the escalation during the therapy might happen. The reaction from the person if something like this happening is, why should I stay here? I need to quit. I'm so ashamed. I don't know what to do right now. Maybe this is something which I need to process by myself. Which means that you are trying to avoid yourself from the contact from the other people, because you are put in the dangerous situation in the first place. That's why I think if another metric is on which side of the house people are more likely to leave the therapy, or to not progress, or to not see the progress or the patterns, it's on our side of the house. The mechanism for this is you are getting the constant feedback loop from the person who you are having a conversation conversation with, right? They're telling you, oh, maybe try to change your voice, or maybe how would you interact in this situation? Would you like to maybe talk to me like you talk to your partner, or treat me like I'm your mother? I will simulate and I will try to tell you how I would respond to this. How would you react to this particular method? And then you are seeing, is it working, is it not working? On their side of the house, you're putting more burden on the patient that you are putting on the person who is literally getting paid to treat you, who is being prepared to treat you, and who have much more education than you in this particular moment. Closing.
Conversational therapists guide this therapy top-down, meaning they will always be in positions of authority. How is it so that you're convinced that...
What's your comparative? On your side of the house, the person who is not in the therapy, the person who thinks that they are the more rational, the person who do not need to deal with inner emotions and fighting with themselves, it will be always in the person of the authority. I don't think that you can claim that the therapist is the worst person of the authority in this claim. But second of all, I don't know if you are the person, if you already admitted to yourself, I have a problem, I want to change myself, I want to adjust, I want to get better, that you are the person that you can trust that actually have more authority over your own well-being, over your own emotion at this particular moment, right? So I think we need to be comparative in this debate, right? If you are not leading the conversation from top down from the therapist, you will be doing that by yourself, or you will be subject to the other people, to the other articles, or to the other books which people are trying to give you. So, panel, I want to be very clear that the most important metric in this debate is what is unique on our side of the house and how you are getting people the feeling that they are actually having someone that is trying to help them and they are not deferred to the alternative methods which might be more harmful for the patient and then more irreversible. Because if you broke the trust of the patient, or if you are seeing that you are not necessarily functioning on a bigger level, on our side of the house, that will be small things, right? I don't like one of the exercises. I don't like one of your responses. I'm feeling a little bit problem, or I'm feeling a little bit like ashamed. But this is not like the big discovery which they try to kind of also point out, right? Because underlying issue, to be fair, for me to function in the society later, they're like, you have better understanding. I don't care if I understand this. I can understand shit ton of things. But if I don't know how to imply this, or if I can't make other people understand me, or if I can't understand my partner, if I can't understand my mother, if I can't understand the other people, this knowledge is useless, right? On our side of the house, you can actually try to achieve the small goals and therefore transfer them into the bigger ones. Which means that the whole process of the therapy is also better because you feel heard, you feel understood, and you feel that there is some more approach towards you, because it might seem for you that the person is just lazy. They are sitting in front of you, you are talking for an hour and a half, and they are like, here's my diagnosis. Maybe you should actually take this pill, maybe because I already diagnosed you, maybe this is something which alleviates your pain. But if you have a conversational, you feel that someone is cheering for you, that someone is taking more care of you, so you are more willing to continue this therapy, and therefore you are also checking your goals. Therefore, panel, I think if the question on our side of the house is on which side of the house people have better perception of therapy, more people goes to therapy, and on which side of the house the therapist is more unique compared to your surroundings, compared to your knowledge or what you can do itself, I think it's clearly the side of opening government. If the question is on which side of the house you better fulfill the goal of therapy, so getting better, coming back to society, functioning daily, and not needing to have the therapy or not thinking about this, we think that on our side of the house you gave better simulation of actually functioning in the family, in the community. That's the two most important things in this debate. Therefore, we are super proud to be opening government.
Thank the speaker for the amazing speech. And now to close the top half, we call the deputy leader of opposition. Here.
Oh, can I borrow your time? Thank you. Yep. To those whose minds differ, those who do not reflect the rest of society, often they are subject to constant misunderstanding. Not only misunderstanding, but advice that is not welcome and is not helpful. Because we as humans are bad at understanding minds that are not our own, and hence perceive irrationality as often simple stupidity. We tell those who starve themselves, or who deprive themselves of joy, or inflict themselves pain, that they simply ought to stop doing that, because it is bad for themselves. They understand this and they do not need this advice, they simply need to feel understood, they need to feel heard. What we're going to prove to you here then is twofold. First of all, conversational therapy is ineffective at understanding individuals and often prescribes solutions which are not useful. Secondarily, if there is a high degree of uncertainty as to whether we fix the patient's life on either side of the house, at the very least, one, the patient gains a framework of understanding they can reapply in future, but two, we get the immediate and certain benefit of the catharsis of finally being listened to. This is going to be the most certain impact of this debate, but we will also try and prove why generally patients act better under our side of the house. First of all then, why generally we just have a degree to which we actually interact better with our patients. The first thing I would like to note here is a research and replication crisis which exists within psychology. What I will note about government is they will say this is symmetric because both psychologists will be flawed in similar ways. However, the explanation will specifically be that insofar as non-conversational therapy prescribes things with less certainty and instead is more reliant on these specific questions asked to the client, we are less reliant on expertise than we are under the conversational model. Note that if we don't know if a surgery is effective, we choose not to intervene and do the surgery and instead do things like pain relief. What we're going to prove to you is that the methods utilized by conversational psychology are uncertain to a degree where they ought not be applied, and hence we ought to defer to more certain, if potentially less effective metrics. Why then is this research just generally fairly unreliable? The first is just that empirically there is a significant replication crisis within psychology, such that it is difficult to trust a lot of the evidence outputted by it. This is just something the average informed voter ought to know about, insofar there are several headlines about it. The secondary thing is I think there are inherent difficulties to studying things like CBT and specifically prescribing useful solutions. The first one is simply that you have a limited scope of applicants, insofar as often conditions are rare or just not that prominent throughout society, and it's hard to get people to actively volunteer to be studied because one, I just don't want my mind to be fucked with like that, but two, it is a humiliating and intense experience to be dissected like an animal or some creature of study. People do not like to be conceived of in these ways because they feel like they're being objectified or dehumanized, such that many individuals do not like engaging in this type of study. Finally, if there's just a stigma around these mental health illnesses, you don't want to actively volunteer to studies because you feel like admitting something about yourself to the external world. This means, first of all, is the pool of applicants is small, so the margin of error is large, insofar as often random statistical noise can results such they're difficult to trust. Secondarily, there are substantial limits on how you can experiment. It is probably difficult to do an experiment where you just give a bunch of people bad therapeutic advice to compare it to good therapeutic advice, because there are just significant ethical limitations on the extent to which you can pursue these methods. Meaning, it is both one, difficult to craft experimental scenarios that are ethical, but two, difficult to craft experimental scenarios where there just aren't significant confounding factors. As in, because human lives are really, really complex, there are probably a lot of factors, too many to control of, when you conduct these experiments, such that it is really hard to get any good data, even when you have a viable path to an experiment. But I would note this does not apply in most instances, just because there are so many ethical restrictions around therapy, such as patient anonymity, the fact that you do have a duty of care towards these individuals, other such things. Third of all, it is just extremely difficult to measure outcomes. As in, it is quite hard to say whether someone has improved in happiness. Often these surveys can be framed in ways that imply one result or another, as in the way in which you ask questions will inherently change of how people conceive of things, or create different interactions of social pressure in how you answer or pertain to your own happiness, meaning that objectively measuring the results produced by these studies is really, really difficult. What this means is that the advice is just extremely unreliable. We do not have good empirical evidence that these are measures that work or actually substantially improve the health of individuals. And you can say, oh, you just received bad advice and you move on from it. But I think there are a few reasons this is actually a significant harm. The first is that you simply feel you are a failure. If you're given advice that is meant to fix you and it doesn't, you feel like you are broken in a way fundamentally no one else, and I think this is just a direct proximate harm. I would note this is probably significant enough where you also quit therapy. Hence, if that is a harm that opening government wants to access, I think it is more significant on our side, where if you believe our empirical analysis, the prominence of bad advice should be significant. The secondary thing is that you tend to over-rationalize the expertise of the psychologist you're interacting with. As in, you view them as an expert, you view them as someone who's more educated, and often as someone who's mentally ill. You either have mental health problems or have just been conditioned by the rest of society to view yourself as someone who is less worthy or less correct in your thoughts. What this means is that even if the advice is bad, even if it doesn't work for you, you keep trying to follow it because you trust your psychologist past a reasonable point, which just means you take actions which do not actively help you and often are directly harmful or at the very least ineffective in your day-to-day life. Finally, it often just means that the advice that is provided to you is not practically implementable. As in, it is things like try having a routine to people with ADHD, which further invalidates their feelings. I would note then that there are additional reasons as to why conversational therapy interacts with patients in bad ways. The first is that if you are directly interventionistic as a therapist, I think you do just have a bias towards your own expertise. You're like, fuck it, I've been to school for 4 years, I know what these symptoms look like, and when a patient identifies another symptom that doesn't align with your expectation of what they should look like empirically, you invalidate their theories because you think they are misunderstanding themselves because you believe you have a better understanding of the human mind than they do. What this means, then as a therapist, you often tend to misunderstand the emotions of your clients and are bad at listening to them because you defer to your own supposed expertise, even when this is made on fairly shaky, empirical grounds. I'll take a PI from closing.
There's a contention within our bench. You say that we're the ones offering specific advice. Zainab says that we're the ones offering vague advice. Which one is it?
What? No, we never say that. If we say that, it's a misunderstanding of our case. Look, what this fundamentally means is that the way in which these biases are applied are further amplified by the fact that the psychologist defers to their own perceived expertise. The problem is because there is a sparsity of empirical evidence, they also just refer to what they own, their own empathic, intuitions, as in what they think is rational, what they think is correct. The problem, most therapists cannot be neurodivergent, or at the very least cannot be neurodivergent in the way they apply to specifically, meaning there is frequent misunderstanding. Again, I think this leads to a degree of invalidation. What does our comparative look like? First of all, I think the anonymity of not directly facing your client, one, creates a degree of safety and comfort for the client, so they do not feel like they're being directly interrogated by an individual. But two, there is just an extent to which psychologists are humbled by the fact they ought to be limited to questions. They ought to be limited to non-intervention. I think this just forces them to take a less direct approach. And we know there's still a degree to which we try and guide conversations away from really destructive places by just asking prompting questions, allowing people to consider themselves. But what you should believe from analysis is that psychological evidence is limited, hence we ought to defer to the best experts possible, ourselves. These people are subjected to constant external advice which invalidates them. What they need is an expert to tell them that their own thoughts and feelings, if not perfect, are at the very least a part of who they are. They are something they can work on and not something they should simply get over or believe does not exist.
Thank the speaker for his great speech, and now to open the second half, we call member of government.
TCG! TCG! TCG!
How is closing government going to win this debate? We're going to prove to you 3 critical things. Firstly, we're going to explain why this is actually done well, and I don't just mean in a generic way, but why this actually on ground looks good. I think OG lacked a lot of visualization and actually grounding their case and characterization. Secondly, we're just going to explain why you actually get better patient engagement beyond just because it is a practical step. You can take the practical step because it's an action. Why can't you easily just take on opposition's advice, an emotional thing, and reflect on your feelings? They don't actually explain why the practical step is easier, so we have a better premise for our case on this. And then lastly, we're just going to impact this out and explain why we get better treatment, co-opting the top half metric on getting things like more specified treatment that patients are willing to engage with. Firstly, why do we think that this is going to be done well? The issue with opening government is broadly just, it's not that I don't even think they give you the right advice to squeeze a ball being done well, because obviously these people are educated. And what I'm talking about is, what does this actually look like? How often is a therapist speaking in your conversation? Why does it not feel like they're having an argumentation with you? Why does it not feel like they're constantly confronting you? They don't explain what this granularly looks like on ground. Let's do this. Firstly, why do I think it's likely to look cooperative? A, you are likely to not antagonize and confront the patient too much for a few reasons. One, I think firstly, you go to a significant amount of training. You probably do things like healthcare, social, and medical training, where you oftentimes learn to do things like conflict resolution. You literally have modules and clinics where you learn how to interact with patients. You literally do OSCEs where you have actors who come in and pretend to be difficult patients who are doing things like crying and who are doing things like pretending to be violent. You constantly learn through the years of study that you do before you become a psychological therapist how to in a nuanced and practical way to handle multiple types of conflict and engagement. You literally learn the practical skills to be able to do this. Secondly, it's also just the fact that the patient and their family can oftentimes take reparative mechanisms, like do things like actively threaten to sue you or report you. So meaning that you oftentimes can't be overly bad with this in the way that you interject. Your language has to be soft. It oftentimes can be antagonizing and blaming overly towards the patient. Thirdly, you're often just beholden to the board of people who hire you and things like performance and standard views. Secondly, You oftentimes need to gather a significant amount of information from the patient in order to be able to treat them, firstly to recommend the things that you need to do for them, but secondly to be able to pass on referrals to things like psychological doctors or other medical teams who may need to do things like diagnosis, testing, and medication. What this therefore means is that, like, and I think maybe this preempts CO's POI, but is valuable in and of itself. It's not the fact that you never let the patient talk and you talk over them and you do things. The reason you actually give them space to talk is so you can gather the information in the first place to actively be able to do this, so you can literally have enough information to say that you have to have enough evidence to support the reason for your treatment plan and the options for the treatment plans that you do. So you need to let the patient talk and you don't talk over them. It is something that they're actively cooperating in. 3, I think that these things are just done well, and this implicitly responds to opening opposition. Like, obviously these are tangible and measurable things that you can have research methods to do. They already concede on their side of the house. Therapy takes a lot longer because of how much the whims and the subject of the patient is more dependent, because it relies on exactly what they say. The issue with this is that on our side of the on their side of the house, because it takes longer, even if you have things like research methods, it's longer for these things. Firstly, they're oftentimes likely to be inconclusive within a short time frame, but they take really long. So therefore, therapy adapts less quickly on their side of the house, and ours is adapting more quickly as things like social attitudes change, as things like, capitalism's getting really fucked, so people are sad for a specific set of reasons that they weren't necessarily 20 years ago. If we have a faster thing on their side of the house, which is the burden that they already concede, it therefore means that we're able to adapt more quickly. You're able to take on research in a more conclusive way, so meaning that the treatment plans you take actively have evidence that is quickly changing and has facts for it. This is something that is likely to be good. It just means that the patient is already going to engage with you well. It is likely done well. It is not antagonistic, and all these types of things. Secondly, why do we prove that they're going to have better engagement from patients? What does opening government tell you? They tell you that people are easily able to talk about the topics because they're more comfortable, because they're day to day. I don't really understand. I debate day to day, but so maybe talking about it in therapy is really hard because it is still an intense emotion that I feel when I do it every day. They never explain why these smaller everyday things are harder to talk about than the big emotions, because these are things that are obviously still triggering. And even if there's some comparative, I don't believe that it is large enough. The reason for this is to be triggered is to reach a threshold. There's a threshold of a certain amount of pain that makes you feel bad and act out. Even if that pain is like 50 versus 70, if the threshold is 40, then the same impact happens because the threshold is met. I don't think there's a comparative here. Why is transparency the most important thing? I think humans often, oftentimes, people going into therapy are really afraid of not knowing what the therapist is actively thinking about them, and knowing. I think the reason this fear is oftentimes really consistent is literally you have your back turned to them. On our side of the house, you can face them. You can see things like encouraging facial expressions as you are actively speaking. You can get things that reinforce you and give you the capacity to keep going. You can oftentimes know what they're thinking because you have an ability to do things like to read their body language, to see like, oh, the question mark's like, I don't know about that, or some things like this that are literally practical. But secondly, it's also the fact that you hear them. You literally get real live in-time feedback about the things they're telling you. This means you know what your therapist is thinking about you because they are actively telling you versus writing it in a secretive notebook. We think that this is really good because, one, you are more willing to be engaged with them at the point where you know what they're actively doing about you, but two, it co-ops opening opposition's metric, because if you care about having more tailored treatment to you, you are more likely to actually give advice and to give responses. That is before the treatment plan is made for you and before you are subscribed to that set of medication that could be bad for you. You actively know and can say, oh, maybe I want to interject here. Maybe, I don't know, like you're going to gain weight on that medication. You can actively interject and say that this is something that might make it more harrowing and difficult for you because the weight gain could cause and trigger other types of mental episodes and issues. These are the things that happen on our side of the house versus the point of introspection where oftentimes you don't know. So you don't know what medication, you don't know what things that they're likely to do for you. So you don't have the ability to interject in time until after that treatment plan is made and the harms impact from this opening.
This is just not what the debate is. Psychology and psychiatry are different. You don't prescribe medication in psychology.
I already said at the top of my framing, you need information because when you refer to a doctor, you have to have reason as to why. Bro, I literally study you. I'm in healthcare. Obviously, I wouldn't make such a fucking stupid mistake. Anyway, simply moving on, because they're going to do things like to pass on, but also they still do make treatment plans. It's the behavioral things that the info side literally talks about, the non-medication, the cognitive behavioral therapy. They literally tell you a way to change and structure your mind. You probably want to make sure that this is actively done in the best way. Secondly, the transparency also gives you a significant amount of trust. You actually feel like you can trust them because they give you information. You don't feel like they're hiding things from you. Note the framing of the mindset of how people are when they oftentimes go to therapy. They're extremely vulnerable, they're extremely afraid, and they're extremely uncertain. They don't know what is likely to happen. When you give them the tools to actively know what's happening and to see what's going on and to be more cooperative, they're likely to actually engage in the treatment plan to the fullest extent that they actively have. Because one, they literally just know how to do it better. They have more information. They have more they have more little pieces because the therapist is giving more time to actively talk to you and telling you more specific ways how to actually, specific ways on how, more specific ways on how to actually implement these things. Why then do we think that we ultimately just impact this out to better treatment? I think one, we already just explained why the treatment itself is even better at the point where you've already drafted the plan, meaning people are more likely to follow it because they actively believe that it suits them. Obviously, the engagement is a prerequisite to having the better treatment. Secondly, we explained why the treatment itself is oftentimes more tailored to these individuals and the things that go on in their life, meaning that they're actually be able to take these outside of the therapy room when you have to manage your emotions away from your therapist. For all these reasons, for your quick.
Thank you, speaker, for the well speech, and we now call member of opposition to open for their team. Here, here.
Let's go!
I promise you this is the most excited a Viennese person has ever been. And just before I start, can I just ask that, I'll take you, don't worry. Just this is important to me, please don't ruin this by yelling or interrupting in a way that's distracting. By virtue of having Eastern European parents, I have been in therapy for more than half of my life. I have done both approaches with around 20 different therapists. Both can be good, both can be shit. Most of the time when people talk about their personal experience within debate, this is bullshit or irrelevant, but this piece of framing will be neither. What is necessary to keep going and to actually resolve your problems is to make sure that to not give up before you have the stability that you seek, before you have all the mechanisms to make sure that you can go and engage with life. To not give up and to establish trust with your therapist, so that even when you are feeling bad and no matter your external circumstances, you keep going, because on both sides of the house, you as a patient will have to be vulnerable, and not just once, because if it works and if you have that trust, if you trust your therapist, you are vulnerable every single time you have that session. And this is intuitive, because one session will not help you. I fucking wish it could. Repair takes time, it takes consistency, and therefore therapy needs to be something you make into a habit, because everyone in this debate so far tells you it's difficult to do this, but the reason why it's difficult is because you are going to therapy after pretending to be normal all day, after repressing all your issues, after just trying to get through the basics, or when you are fucking bed rotting, when you've locked yourself in your room, it is dark and you do not feel like you deserve it. This is or when you have doubts about the therapy in the first place. You need to be able to, in these circumstances, convince yourself that the effort is worth it and that you are worth it when your self-worth is on the fucking floor. This is impossible to do without pre-established trust with your therapist, without knowing that that person is actually going to help you and actually someone that you can be vulnerable with. And Gov is reliant, whether they explicitly say this or not, in the trust that the patient has in the therapist's authority, and not as someone who actually understands these issues, meaning they will blindly subject themselves to this a lot of the time because this therapist is the one guiding these sessions top down, i.e. they will be the ones interrupting and telling you, hey, this is actually what it looks like, this is how you need to perceive it, i.e. when I think I am a bad person, that I will explicitly get told by my therapist this isn't the case, as opposed to exploring why that is. And trust is crucial for this to work. There will be bad therapists both sides of the house, but the likelihood that you perceive the therapist to be someone that you can trust is far better on our side. This is literally the same, for the same reasons that when we go to our friends, we ask them to fucking listen to our problems, not to talk to us. This is why I get pissed off when I talk to men about my shit and they come with me with solution-oriented thinking. I don't fucking need that. I need to feel that I am understood and not crazy and not someone who is fucking weird because everyone else in society is fucking acting normal, and the reflection that I get back is that I am not fucking like them. And it is important that this happens because you learn that you lead these sessions. You learn that you can interject and intervene because the hierarchy is flatter. The therapist is only there insofar as they guide you towards patterns of thinking and towards the same result that government wants to get. And this is important at the beginning of therapy because people are in denial about their problems. People justify the horrors that have happened to them inside of their head, saying, if my parents beat me, it's because I was a bad child. Every one of us will also treat our therapist like a stranger in the first session because they are. You can act and admit and think different things than you do when you are alone with a stranger because inherently this is how we fucking work. We will always try to have these bases where we project something of what we believe people want to see or what we actually are. You need to be able to break that down, and in order to break that down and to be that vulnerable, you need to fucking trust the person in front of you. And this, crucially, I want to stress, you will not linearly get better. You will have shit happen in your life. People will break up with you, deaths of people important to happen to you, and sometimes you will just have a bad day and fail to implement the coping mechanisms. It is important that at the point this inevitably happens to everyone, the same habit leads you back to the therapist you trust because they are not just someone who is listening to you. For most people, this will be the only source of support they have, the only people who know about their problems, and the only ones that they can be this vulnerable with in the first place. With a conversational therapist, you do not control when you are done. Crucially, this is why it doesn't work that I can go back to them. Your therapist controls and tells you when you are done. As you believe this to be normal because you have put yourselves in their hands. You've given into their authority, and if this continue, you are forced to rely on this therapist as well. You learn the skills, you implement them, you come back and tell your therapist excitedly, you're able to make that phone call despite anxiety, and when it works, the conversation it tells you, well done, you've done it, keep doing this. It is good that I am in therapy for longer, because I don't care if this costs more, takes up more of my time, at least this costs towards making the rest of my life worth living. If it fails, I have sacrificed money and time for nothing, and I'm far less likely to go back when I believe that I should be done at the first place, and this is just a setback. Claudia.
If trust is the metric in this debate, on your side of the house you are more likely to perceive a therapist as a stranger with a PhD sitting far away from you and letting you ramble. On our side of the house, you can talk, you can smile, you can exchange, you can react to them. I have had really meaningful conversations with some of the most important people in my life over the phone. I have not seen them. I have not interacted with them. I understand you think they have a PhD, but this is also something you have to address, especially because the PhD is what gives that therapist authority. Let's also address the pushes on how introspective therapy actually helps you from God. The introspective therapist will let you talk, but they also intervene at the necessary points for you. Opening opposition says this, please engage charitably from with. When you tell your therapist, for example, my parents hit me, but I was a bad child, the therapist doesn't go, you weren't a bad child, this is what actually your parents were thinking. The introspective therapist asks you why you were a bad child and forces you to think about it and to question the baseline of beliefs that have cemented themselves to protect yourself long ago. Therapy is a mirror. You, for potentially the first time, are seeing your issues without how your brain has learned to accept what has happened to you or justify or explain the way the horrors you are experiencing. And this works because it breaks that basis for which you approach life, for how you or what things you deserve and how your relationships or what's important to you. The realization that you are actually innocent, that you're a pretty fucking cool kid, changes you as a person. You're fucking reborn. It means you interact with everything in a fundamentally different way as a new person. This is the necessary step that needs to happen, because even if I'm going to be stupid charitable, I have mastered every single coping skill from this therapist. If I still believe I deserve to be beat as a child, it is all for fucking nothing. And this is crucial, because even if I have an eating disorder or I was abused or have PTSD from war, I will still fucking feel this. The details are important despite the similar experiences or the what's it called? Like when they tell me what I have. A conversation is inherent by structure of approach will be less likely to go into detail because they identify the issue of low self-esteem and the pathway towards it. The application doesn't work if you don't understand it because they guide the session. Callum will probably do the rest. For all of these reasons, incredibly powerful.
Thank the speaker for this great speech. And now to close for government side, we call Government Week. Here, here.
want to do is respond to CEO, because I think the extension was made before Henny gets up and talks. Henny tells you that therapy is something that is uniquely vulnerable. You're sharing the darkest, deepest parts of your heart. You're somewhat vulnerable and you feel judged on both sides of the house. Henny tells you why transparency is key, because you don't have epistemic access to ever know what someone is thinking about you, but much less your therapist, who is in a unique position of power over you in a particularly most vulnerable state of your life. This means that they tell you trust is something that people care about in closing opposition. I'm unsure why you trust someone who you never know. When you feel like you don't know what your therapist thinks about you, I think you already have low self-esteem. So on our side of the house, you tell yourself that your therapist is judging you, even if your therapist isn't. You tell yourself that your therapist just doesn't understand you, and your therapist just doesn't get it. So it means that you stop showing up. It means that long-term CEO can't exist within this debate because our extension already implicitly responded to it. I'm going to be comparative now within this debate. I think when you get a therapist who talks to you more, when you get a therapist who maybe asks you what sort of sports that you like, who maybe talks about things even if they are irrelevant and is perceived to be sharing more about themselves, you break down the biggest barrier to therapy, which is that your therapist is another person like you, with thoughts, feelings and hopes. And while we know obviously everybody else is a person, we never actually reach that realization because we view them in a position of power, as being a smart doctor who went to Harvard Law School and who knows it all, and me being a stupid idiot who is suffering within the moment. We think transparency and trust is the most important thing, and we think closing government is the team that specifically does it. CEO is out. Weigh our case. First, no thank you. I'm going to weigh the framing Henny brings you as to why conversationalism is done well, but also why it's necessary. Because note, this increases the likelihood of everything that our opening government tells you. So if you want to weigh us against them, you can weigh us on certainty, because I actually do think that they do some good stuff. But we also break the top half deadlock, so weigh us over both the top half teams. Because while I know that talking can be good, I'm unsure whether one, the talking is done in a good way, like opening governments say, or whether in opening opposition, the talking is done in a way that seems antagonistic. By top half, neither team provides us an answer to the bleeding question. It's not, the answer doesn't come until Henny speaks up here, until she provides the framing as to why the perception of this is likely, the perception of this is likely to be good based on how they intervene. Because one, therapists probably aren't stupid. Opening opposition probably has to be more credible to have the framing that comes out. It's that therapists go to school, they study, they're liable to boards, they don't want to be sued. But also therapists probably also care about patients somewhat, given that therapy isn't a super lucrative job that you make lots of money about it. So you probably have some personal satisfaction from actually trying to care about your therapist. So it's unlikely that conversationalism is done in a way where the therapist outdrowns and talks too much. So it's probably done in a way that is positive. We increase the likelihood then of opening government. Secondly, why we get more trust, no thank you, which is probably the most important impact in this debate. We think that people are scared of therapists on their side of the house because of all the things I told you. They're in a position of power and you're uniquely vulnerable. Thus, them being more conversational just takes away some of the barrier for them seeming as scary, for them seeming as unknown. Because for a lot of people, they come from cultures like mine, where my mom has never heard of therapy and thinks it's a concept for rich white people. They don't know what therapists are, and the only reason they know what you are and who you do is when you tell them yourself, when you let them know, here's what I think, what do you think? When you question them, but you also let them know that I don't know everything. What sort of exercise do you like? Let's help it and let's build a plan together. Which is the third reason that me and Henny need to win this debate and must be through to the semis, is that we tell you why the practice plan is actually good. Because George just says it could be good for you to do exercise, it could be likely. OG say a lot of things that could be true. CG say a lot of things that is certainly true. This is the weighing on it. We tell you why that in conversationalist therapy, you are also more engaged in the action plan. Because in both OO and CO, the therapist has to recommend that you do something to cope with your symptoms at the end of the day. The difference is that they're more prescriptive, because after they've listened to you, they just tell you, hey, change this. On our side of the house, you're consistently asking for feedback, you're consistently changing things every week. So it means even when the plan does come, the plan is more tailored and more suited to you. Flips OO, before I go on to your responses, yeah.
Our mechanisms don't relate to bad incentives, simply a lack of capacity to fully understand your clients when you have your own biases. I don't know why transparency is good, and that transparency leads to me being invalidated.
The problem is your mechanizations are symmetric. Even when you introspect clients, you have a lack of capacity to be able to understand them. So why do you ever understand the underlying issue as you say it. When you give a metric, when you give mechanisms that hurt CG and OG, also be wary, they hurt and mitigate your own case. I tried to point this out in my POI, the tensions that existed, because I kind of did want you guys to get through. Now, on to actual responses to opening opposition. They say that they give better advice because therapists are able to get more information from patients, which they need because they don't have epistemic access to the patient's head. I think my getting to the core issue often isn't that hard and is still done on their debates. I'm going to symmetrify the only non-symmetric thing left. Because one, oftentimes people are depressed because of a situation that happened to them. You've gotten fired from your job or your mum dies. Very easy to get to core issue, even on our side of the house. Second reason, people are depressed because their brain structurally doesn't produce chemicals. So maybe you have structural genes for schizophrenia. Maybe you have structural schemes for depression. This means on both sides of the house, people know what the underlying issue is, but what they need to do is then teach you how to cope and manage, because you're probably always going to be depressed, you're always going to be anxious, you're always going to have schizophrenia then. What does this mean on our side of the house? That you need to have a conversation with your therapist, but also you need to continue engaging with them. You need to see your therapist more as a friend, less as someone who is able to judge you, because you need to consistently get the help from them. But also, it means that we still get all of OO's benefits of getting to the core issue, because I think it's done on both sides of the house. OO is symmetric. Second piece of response then to opening opposition. Even if opening opposition is right and the whole symmetric wash doesn't land with you, they just say that they also get good advice. I think one, we're also able to give good advice, and that this advice is actually better. One, the reason why it's better is because the patient is just more involved in the process, because you make it over each of the sessions, so there's more feedback, but also two, because there's more trial and error. So maybe yes, if exercise doesn't work, you maybe suggest a different type of exercise on their side of the house, versus on their side of the house, when you give advice, you only give advice once at the very end, and you probably don't give advice again. So you just give less advice, so you have less feedback on the advice and whether it works. They still need to give you advice on how to cope symptoms. It's not something they're able to get. Look, I think it has to be CG.
Thanks, speaker, for this great speech. And now to close for their side in the debate as a whole, opposition week, here.
We're good. I want to start by framing the fact that while this speech will eventually end, thank God, the process of therapy and the process of betterment is something that never ends. It's something that never has to end, and something that we, in often cases, don't want to end. And I want to be very, very clear as to why this framing is important. On government side, their therapy is shrouded in the idea of solution, shrouded in the idea that if you work with this therapist, if you cooperate with them, if you buy into their ideals, if you buy into the things that they are telling you, because that cooperative process that both government teams tell you is necessary for you to cooperate towards something. When I'm having a conversation with somebody, I'm building towards something, building towards some kind of conclusion. And that conclusion comes in the form of a solution, something that you are able to achieve. I think with a specific thing that Alex tells you, which is really important, it is often at the point that you are going to therapy, there is no solution. The harm that has been enacted upon you has already happened. The trauma is already there. You can't go and undo it. Maybe you can go and make some kind of recompense, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't undo anything. That doesn't change anything. All that can change, all that ever can change, is how you feel about it, how you're able to engage with it, if you're able to engage in the world, in the society, and the things around you in a healthy manner. I think what that means then is that it's fine, and it's often good when you are able to continue to go to therapy and continue to go there for potentially the rest of your life, and continue to work on these things for the rest of your life. Because mental health is a constant process. It is not like when you break a leg or break an arm and you just have to hold it in place for a couple of months and then it's fine and then it's broken. The brain is complicated. The neurons that are firing are not understandable. We have so many external stimuli acting, changing our brain daily basis. I think that means your mental situation is constantly changing, and therefore the need to constantly engage is fine, because you're unable to find that solution because you're unable to find that solution. The ability to have a space where you can continue to talk, continue to feel, and continue to work out how you feel at that specific moment is really, really important. important. I also want to talk about the key problematic nature of the conversational point, because I think the problem with the CG whip is that it was written before Alex's speech was even done, right? Because I think it doesn't engage with the hierarchy flip that Alex tells you. Sure, on both sides of the house, the therapist has some degree of authority. This is true, but the authority is discharged in very different ways. On our side of the house, the authority comes from the providing of a specific space, a safe space where you quietly and contemplatively can exercise your own feelings in a manner that is able to do. The authority is the ability to push back the rush that other people have. When Alex tells you, when you phone your friend might be busy, they might have that job they have to go to, they can always rush your feelings in that hour. That therapist is dedicating to you. That is their authority. What is their authority on the government side? Their authority is the ability to push solutions on you. Even if they don't feel like they're pushing solutions, even if they feel like they're cooperating and understanding you to push solutions, they're always pushing solutions on you because they're always coming from their perspective, which is not your perspective. Even if you are able to engage with them to some extent, to tell them, here's why the things that you tell them are probably likely to be worse. One, you recognize the power imbalance more directly. You recognize their role in trying to gain solutions on you. So the way that you engage with them is not trying to uncover how you feel, it is trying to dictate the solutions that they are giving you, even when you can. Two, you do have a lack of knowledge. I want to point out here that the CEO says, you have like no transparency here because you don't understand what they think. I think you don't understand what this therapist thinks on either side of the house. I think one, they likely speak in a language and a mannerism which you don't speak in. I don't think this is just therapy speak. I think they literally probably come from an entirely different background, an entirely different life from you, because they've been able to go to the universities and get these degrees. They've been able to do the things that even if you have done, you probably engage with them in a very different way because of the mental state that you exist in. And three, because you feel like you have to be their friend, because you feel like the role when they tell you, like when they ask you, what's your favourite sports team, that creates an implicit expectation that, they are trying to be my friend and trying to relate to me in these ways, so I ought to engage with them in that capacity. I think therefore the pathway to victory that we have fought and we have succeeded in terms of the Gov team is very clear. One, if you are unable to build trust in the environment and the therapy situation that you're engaging in, you never continue to go to therapy in the first place. I think the Gov teams across try to tell you, this gives you specific practical steps that you are able to take. I think when those practical steps don't even begin to move you towards a solution because the solution is never there in the first place, this feels worse. I think when you feel that there is a higher burden of obligation because you have to engage with somebody on a human level and you have to engage with their feelings and their understandings, again, even if the therapist is not pushing this on you, even if you don't actually have to do that, I think you feel like you probably ought to do that because you're engaging in a conversational manner of discussion. I think you're just able to build a better trusting relationship when you feel they are there to listen, exclusively listen. I think that's the thing that Alex tells you. When you have these problems and you are trying to work through them, particularly for the first time, you're not at the solution point, right? The reason why grief, the stages of grief, don't start with the bargaining, they don't start with the exception, they start with the just recognizing that you are in grief and recognizing what that means. You don't get to that acceptance yet. You are not at the point where you are even able to think about solutions. So even if you buy that the solutions might be good on Gov, because you engage with us at the early stage, you never lock in to get any kind of solution in the first place. Claudia.
On your side of the house, this traumatized patient with complicated brain, irrational, creating their own solutions because you want to change something, you need to act. On which side of the house the solution is more likely to be effective or better targeted?
One, we tell you why the solutions are often unachievable on either side of the house. But let's buy that there is some solution to get. I think those solutions get worse at the point at which when you're engaging in with the therapist, you're telling them the things you feel they ought to hear anyway. I think when you engage in this cooperative dialogue, you feel like you have to give back to them to some extent. You don't feel like these are your solutions, you feel like these are your cooperative working together solutions. I think this is really important for opposition to win, right? Because here's the way that we specifically weigh across our top half. We agree that the form of therapy is likely to be better on our side of the house, but the specific point, the thing that Alex brings you, is why that lock-in is so important, why engaging in the first step and continuing is more important. The opening opposition never actually bring you the analysis that you need to actually be able to continue to do this therapy in the first place in order to actually achieve the benefits they tell you. We tell you that the understanding that you're in an environment that is about your control, about yourself, about being listened listened to, rather than being talked to, rather than being co-opted into some kind of narrative where you have to work together with somebody to achieve some kind of shared solution. It is about what you want. It is about what you need, and you are able to prioritize and put yourself first at the point where you need to do this the most, where that is where you can recognize what you need at the most. So proud to oppose.